Hello there, my friend. Welcome back to our English Learning Podcast. I'm so happy you're here with me today. You know, I've been thinking about what story to share with you this week, and I decided to tell you about one of the most important people in human history. His name was Jesus, and whether you're religious or not, his story has touched billions of people around the world for over 2,000 years. Now, I want you to feel comfortable, so let me say this right from the start. This isn't about trying to change what you believe. This is simply about learning English through an amazing story that has influenced art, music, literature, and culture for centuries. It's a story that teaches us about kindness, forgiveness, and love, and along the way, we'll learn some wonderful English words together. So take a deep breath, relax, and let me tell you about Jesus of Nazareth. His story begins in a small town called Bethlehem, in a land we now call Israel, about 2,000 years ago. The story starts with a young woman named Mary. She was probably just a teenager living in a simple family in the town of Nazareth. Mary was engaged to a man named Joseph, who was a carpenter. That means Joseph made things from wood, tables, chairs, doors, things that people needed for their homes. One day, something extraordinary happened to Mary. According to the story, an angel appeared to her. An angel is a messenger from God, a spiritual being that people believe brings important news from heaven. This angel told Mary that she would have a very special baby, and that this baby would be the Son of God. Mary was scared at first, can you imagine? But she was also brave, and she said yes to this incredible responsibility. Now, this created a problem. Mary and Joseph weren't married yet, and Mary was going to have a baby. In those days, this was very serious. People might not understand. They might think badly of Mary and Joseph. But Joseph was a good man. When he learned what was happening, he decided to stay with Mary and help her. He chose to trust and to love, even when it was difficult. Just before the baby was born, something happened that made their situation even harder. The Roman government, which ruled the land at that time, said that everyone had to go back to their hometown to be counted. This was called a census. It's when the government counts all the people to know how many live in the country. For Joseph, this meant traveling to Bethlehem, which was about 90 miles away. That's a long journey, especially for a woman who was about to have a baby. So Mary and Joseph traveled to Bethlehem. They probably walked most of the way, or maybe Mary rode on a donkey. When they arrived, the town was full of people who had come for the census. Every inn, every guest house, every place where travelers could stay was completely full. Mary and Joseph looked everywhere, but there was no room for them. Finally, someone felt sorry for them. They offered Mary and Joseph a place to stay in a stable. A stable is a building where animals live, horses, cows, sheep. It wasn't comfortable, but it was shelter. And that night, in that simple stable, surrounded by animals, Mary gave birth to her baby. She wrapped him in soft cloths and laid him in a manger. That's a box where animals eat their food. It became the baby's first bed. They named the baby Jesus, which means God saves in the Hebrew language, and according to the story, this little baby, born in the humblest place you can imagine, would grow up to change the world. Now let me tell you about Jesus' childhood. After Jesus was born, Mary and Joseph took him to Jerusalem, the big city nearby, to present him at the temple. The temple was the most important religious building for Jewish people, a place where they went to pray and worship God. At the temple, an old man named Simeon held the baby Jesus and said that this child would bring light to the world. Even as a baby, people sensed that Jesus was special. When Jesus was still very young, his family had to leave quickly and go to Egypt. A jealous king named Herod wanted to hurt baby Jesus because he was afraid that Jesus might one day take his power. So Mary and Joseph became refugees, people who have to leave their home country to stay safe. They lived in Egypt for a while until it was safe to return home. So the story is that the group from Jesus wanted to return home. Jesus grew up in Nazareth, a small town in the hills of Galilee. It was a quiet place where most people were farmers or craftsmen. Jesus learned to read and write, which was not common for all children in those days. He also learned Joseph's trade, carpentry. Jesus spent many years working with his hands, making things from wood, helping his family, and living a simple life. But when Jesus was about 30 years old, something changed. He felt called to do something different with his life. He left his work as a carpenter and began traveling around the countryside teaching people about God's love. This was the beginning of what we call his ministry, his work of teaching and helping others. Jesus was an amazing teacher. He didn't teach in schools or universities. Instead, he taught outside, in fields and by lakes, on hillsides, and in marketplaces. He spoke in a way that ordinary people could understand. He told stories called parables, simple stories that taught important lessons about life and love. One of his most famous parables is about a man who was traveling and got attacked by robbers. They took his money and hurt him badly, then left him on the side of the road. Many people walked by and saw the injured man, but they didn't stop to help. They were too busy or too afraid, or they just didn't care. But then a stranger came by, someone from a different country, someone who was supposed to be an enemy, but this stranger stopped. He helped the injured man, took care of his wounds, and even paid for him to stay at an inn until he got better. The point of the story? We should help others, even if they're different from us. Jesus taught that love was the most important thing in life. He said we should love God, and we should love other people as much as we love ourselves. He taught that we should forgive people who hurt us instead of trying to hurt them back. He said that the poor and the weak were just as important as the rich and the powerful. These were revolutionary ideas. They challenged the way many people thought about the world. But Jesus didn't just teach with words. He also showed his love through actions. The stories say that Jesus could heal sick people, he could make blind people see again, help people who couldn't walk to stand up and dance, and even bring people back from the dead. Whether you believe these miracles really happened or not, they show us that Jesus cared deeply about people who were suffering. Jesus also spent time with people that others avoided. He ate dinner with tax collectors who were hated because they took money from their own people for the Roman government. He talked with women, which was unusual for religious teachers in those days. He welcomed children when his followers tried to send them away. He showed compassion. That's a deep feeling of love and concern for others who are hurting. For about 3 years, Jesus traveled around, teaching and healing. He chose 12 men to be his closest followers, his disciples. These weren't important or educated men. They were fishermen, tax collectors, ordinary people. But Jesus saw something special in them. He taught them, and they learned to teach others. As Jesus became more famous, he also made enemies. Some religious leaders didn't like his teachings because Jesus criticized them for being more interested in rules than in helping people. Some political leaders were worried because Jesus was becoming too popular. They were afraid he might start a revolution. The tension grew stronger and stronger. Finally, Jesus decided to go to Jerusalem for the Jewish holiday called Passover. This was a festival that celebrated when God had saved the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt many years before. Thousands of people came to Jerusalem for this celebration. When Jesus arrived in Jerusalem, crowds of people welcomed him. They waved palm branches and shouted with joy. They thought Jesus had come to be their king, to free them from Roman rule. But Jesus had something different in mind. During his last week in Jerusalem, Jesus did something that made his enemies very angry. He went to the temple and found people buying and selling things there, making money from religion. Jesus was furious. He turned over their tables and told them to leave. He said the temple should be a place of prayer, not a place of business. Jesus also spent time teaching his disciples about what would happen after he was gone. He told them that he would die, but that his death would have a special meaning. He said it would be like a sacrifice, giving up his life so that others could be forgiven and have a relationship with God. On the Thursday night before he died, Jesus had a special dinner with his 12 disciples. This meal is now called the Last Supper, and it's one of the most famous scenes in art and literature. During this dinner, Jesus took bread and wine and told his followers that these represented his body and blood, which he would give for the world. He told them to remember him every time they shared bread and wine together. But that same night, something terrible happened. One of Jesus' disciples, a man named Judas, had made a deal with Jesus' enemies. For 30 pieces of silver, Judas agreed to help them capture Jesus. Late that night, Judas led soldiers to a garden where Jesus was praying. Judas kissed Jesus on the cheek. This was the signal to show the soldiers which man was Jesus. Jesus was arrested and taken away. The next day, Friday, Jesus was put on trial. The charges against him were not clear, but the crowds demanded that he be executed. The Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, didn't think Jesus had done anything wrong, but he was afraid of the crowd. So he gave the order for Jesus to be crucified. Crucifixion was a terrible way to die. It was used by the Romans to punish the worst criminals. Jesus was nailed to a wooden cross and left to die slowly. Even while he was dying, Jesus showed his character. He forgave the people who were killing him, he asked God to take care of his mother Mary, and he comforted another man who was dying on a cross next to him. After Jesus died, his body was taken down from the cross and buried in a tomb, a cave carved out of rock. A large stone was rolled in front of the opening. Jesus' followers were heartbroken. They thought their teacher was gone forever. But then something amazing happened. On Sunday morning, 3 days after Jesus died, some women went to the tomb to take care of his body. When they got there, they found that the stone had been rolled away. The tomb was empty. Jesus' body was gone. An angel told the women that Jesus had come back to life. He had risen from the dead. This event is called the resurrection, and it's the most important part of the Christian faith. Christians believe that Jesus' resurrection proved that he really was the Son of God, and that death is not the end of the story. Over the next 40 days, Jesus appeared to his disciples and many other people. He ate with them, talked with them, and continued to teach them. Then, according to the story, Jesus ascended into heaven. He went up to be with God, but he promised his followers that he would send them the Holy Spirit to help them continue his work. And that's exactly what happened. Jesus' disciples, who had been scared and confused after he died, became brave and confident. They began traveling everywhere, telling people about Jesus and his teachings. They started communities of believers, and the Christian faith began to spread throughout the world. Now, you might be wondering, what happened next? Well, the story of Jesus didn't end with his death and resurrection. His influence continued to grow. Within a few hundred years, Christianity had spread throughout the Roman Empire. Kings and emperors became Christians. The faith reached Africa, Asia, and eventually every continent on Earth. Jesus' teachings became the foundation for hospitals, schools, and universities. They inspired great works of art, music, and literature. They motivated people to fight against slavery, to help the poor, and to work for justice and peace. Even today, more than 2 billion people around the world call themselves Christians. That's about 1/3 of all the people on Earth. But Jesus' influence reaches beyond Christianity. Muslims honor Jesus as a great prophet. Many people who aren't religious still admire his teachings about love, forgiveness, and compassion. So who was Jesus? He was a teacher who told people that God loved them. He was a healer who cared for the sick and the suffering. He was a friend to outcasts and outsiders. He was a man who taught that the most important thing in life is to love God and love other people. Jesus lived only about 33 years, and he only taught for about 3 years. But in that short time, he changed the world forever. His message was simple but powerful. God loves you, forgive others, help those in need, and don't be afraid to stand up for what's right. Let me ask you a few questions to help you think about what we've talked about today. What was Jesus' job before he became a teacher? Can you remember where Jesus was born and why his parents had to travel there? What was one of the important lessons Jesus taught through his stories? And what do Christians believe happened 3 days after Jesus died? Think about these questions for a moment. You don't have to answer them out loud, but they'll help you remember the story better. You know, whether you're a Christian, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Hindu, or someone who doesn't follow any religion at all, I think we can all learn something from Jesus' story. He showed us that every person has value, that we should care for those who are hurting, and that love is stronger than hate. In our world today, we still face many of the same problems that existed in Jesus' time. We still have poverty, injustice, and conflict. We still struggle with selfishness and fear. But Jesus' teachings remind us that we can choose to be different. We can choose to be kind instead of cruel, to forgive instead of seeking revenge, to help instead of ignoring those in need. As we finish today's episode, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through history. Learning about Jesus is not just about learning English. It's about understanding one of the most important figures in human history, someone whose life and teachings continue to inspire people all over the world. Remember, every time you listen to stories like this, you're not just improving your English. You're also learning about different cultures, different ways of thinking, and different values that have shaped our world. This makes you a more knowledgeable and understanding person. Keep practicing your English, keep asking questions, and keep learning about the world around you. There are so many amazing stories to discover, so many interesting people to meet through our language learning journey. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I'll see you next week for another story that will help you learn English and understand our world a little better. Until then, take care of yourself, be kind to others, and keep learning. Goodbye for now, my friend.